That's being factual, mowing the skulls of 1.1 million children. And are these children being used as human shields? Look at what they say in this text. We are indiscriminately, randomly using insane, crazy amounts of firepower directed at a civilian population. So that's one side of the question. The other side is who provokes these periodic mowings of the lawn? Let's take one case, which is the best documented. In June 2008, Hamas and Israel reached a ceasefire. The ceasefire held up until November 4th, 2008. What happened on November 4th? President Obama won the presidential election in the United States. So Israel knew all the cameras would be directed, the world's cameras, would be directed at the United States and the outcome of the presidential election. Israel at that moment elected to break the ceasefire and go in and launch what was called back then Operation Cast Lead. That lasted from December 26th to January 17th. There is no dispute whatsoever. Even Israeli publications, official Israeli publications, acknowledge the ceasefire held until November 4th, when Israel broke the ceasefire, and what eventually ensued on December 26th was Operation Cast Lead. So it's not true that Hamas breaks the ceasefires. However, I want to make a point, because I said before, I'm not afraid of the truth. It is not true that the only thing that's needed now is a ceasefire. A ceasefire has to be number one on the agenda, no question about it. But that number one has to be accompanied by or attended by number two, which is to end the illegal, inhuman blockade of Gaza, that medieval siege, which even the Goldstone report, which was issued after Operation Cast Lead, described as verging on a crime against humanity. That blockade has to end, or it's true. These actions by Hamas, or as I prefer to say, the people of Gaza, will recur and recur and recur until and unless the population of Gaza has been wiped out, has been exterminated. Now, Israel's goal now is to do just that. It decided on October 7th that what happened, you know the cliche, a crisis is also an opportunity. And Israel realized on October 7th, the crisis of the atrocities that occurred on October 7th were also an opportunity. And the opportunity was to once and for all solve the Gaza question. And solving the Gaza question meant anywhere from an ethnic cleansing to expel the entire population to the Egyptian Sinai, to two, making Gaza uninhabitable from now until kingdom come, to three, what Prime Minister Netanyahu said. You have to treat the people of Gaza like Amalek, referring to the Hebrew Bible, wipe out every man, woman, child, and animal, every camel, every fox. So that was the opportunity that Israel seized upon on October 7th to once and for all find a final solution to the Gaza question.
That Amalek rhetoric is, of course, incredibly loaded, and customary usage of either religious national myth or the kind of colloquialism likely to elicit broad public support is often mobilized in the immediate aftermath of crisis in order to curry political favor and to legitimize expedient military action. I'm thinking of George W. Bush's sort of kill these folks in the post 9/11 era, which subsequently has been shown to have been a misguided approach and created more negative consequences than perhaps would have been anticipated, as well as being targeted in areas that are, in retrospect, inadvisable and inappropriate. One of the, to connect it again to the sort of your reference to Amalek and the sort of this Talmudic reference to extermination, I wonder, Norman, and I think it's vital that your participation and contribution to this conversation is as vital as like when I've seen Hasidic Jews participate in advocacy for peace, or my friend Gabor Mate talking about a requirement for peace, because I think it has a particular resonance when survivors of the Holocaust, this great scar upon the heart of the Jewish people, and this significant event in what has led to the establishment of the State of Israel. I say this as a dilettante, as an outsider, and a person who doesn't claim to have anything other than a superficial understanding. It seems vital to me that people that could legitimately take up a strong position on the, let's call it the other side, advocate for peace, advocate for clemency, advocate for tolerance, compassion, and solution. But I feel that as I have you here, I'd love to ask you how you tackle the idea that enshrined within Hamas's raison d'etre is the extermination of the Jewish people. That's something that I've continually heard to legitimize extreme military measures, i.e. you cannot negotiate with terrorists, a very sort of common maxim or axiom in conflicts of this kind. I've heard people say that people seem to care less when other Muslim and Arab nations exterminate Arabs, i.e. Within Syria. I've also heard people say, like when talking about the shield issue, that perhaps it's as I've heard it rendered, it's more that that Hamas are within a civilian population, and my personal position is peace, stop war immediately. That's my personal position. Just so you don't think that I'm advocating for these kind of what I would regard as extreme and agonising actions. But I would say, how do you cover Hamas's rhetoric around genocide, which rhetorically is comparable, to the Amalek reference that you made? The idea that just by being within that community there is a degree of shielding, and the idea that that genocide, that sort of the Israeli people feel that there is a sort of a peripheral genocide that could be enacted by the sort of numerous hostile nations and people that are around them, and that this somehow legitimizes the sort of ongoing threat of this presence. Because I suppose you would have to fear that, wouldn't you, in order to be able to, even the accounts I read earlier from your book, in order to legitimize violence of that nature, you would have to fear for your own way of life. You would have to have the ultimate motivation. So again, Hamas's MO and raison d'etre, the idea of shielding within Gaza, making it inevitable, and the fact that, yes, Israel could, if they wanted to, this is another common argument, they could wipe out all Gaza and the West Bank, and they haven't. Therefore, like the Hamas are operating at maximum capacity and Israel aren't. So in that gap is clemency and compassion. How do you address those arguments, please, Norman?
Well, because I'm on the older side and you're on the younger side, you're going to have to refresh my memory for each of these questions, because you just overloaded my memory bank. So I'm going to ask you, let's start with the first one, the Hamas Charter. I don't want to get into the technicalities here. This is not an academic seminar. I'll just try to make myself brief on this point. Since Hamas won the election in 2006, the parliamentary election in Gaza, and even before that, but we'll start from 2006, Hamas has repeatedly made offers to Israel, either for what's called a Hudna, H-U-D-N-A, which just means a long-term ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians, a ceasefire along the term, a truce along the roughly about 20 to 30-year truce. They've made that offer, and they've also made offers to establish a Palestinian state along the lines of the international consensus, meaning the June 1967 border, Israel within its legal borders, and a Palestinian state within the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. All those peace offerings by Hamas were completely rejected by Israel and backed by the United States. So it's not true. The factual record is very clear on that. It's not true that Hamas was unwilling to reach a reasonable settlement of the conflict. It was willing to do so, but those peace offerings were rejected by Israel and the United States out of hand. There were not even an attempt. It wasn't even an attempt at negotiations. Which brings me to your second question. And I want to encourage you, Russell, ask me the tough questions, because it's no point in preaching to the choir. You want to reach new people and people who have legitimate doubts. So you might answer to the question, to the reply I just gave. You could say, yes, it's probably true. You know more than me. It's probably true that Hamas made peace offerings, but of course Israel rejected them. How can you negotiate with a terrorist organization? And even people like Bernie Sanders in the United States, during the first month of the Israeli genocide in Gaza, he kept saying he's against the ceasefire because he can't negotiate with Hamas, because Hamas is a terrorist organization. Now, I'm going to ask you and your listeners to answer a very simple question. It couldn't be simpler. Let's take what I mentioned earlier, Operation Protective Edge, between December 26, 2008 and January 17, 2009. Let's just take that one example. The estimates are that during Operation Cast Lead, Israel killed about 1,400 Gazans, and of whom 350 were children. Okay? And it also destroyed 6,300 homes, and it laid waste all of Gaza. Okay? And I think I can prove to you and all of your listeners what I said earlier. This was a completely unprovoked attack by Israel. It broke the ceasefire. It launched the attack. Now, I'd like you and your listeners to keep in mind, we're talking about just one of Israel's operations, Operation Cast Lead. So now let's fast forward to October 7th. On October 7th, the estimates are about 1,200 Israelis were killed. And of those 1,200, approximately 30 were children. So in terms of numbers, obviously the total number is roughly in the same ballpark, 1,400 in Cast Lead, Gazans killed, 1,200 Israelis killed on October 7th. Children, it's a very big order of magnitude difference, 350 children in Gaza, about 30 children in Israel. Now, here is the very simple question. I do not think it can be any simpler. If